right, Beck, it's all yours. Welcome.
Thank you all so much. And yeah, it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. Um, Betty, nice to see you. Saw you yesterday, so great to see you again today. I want to just first start by saying I'm Beck Whipple. I'm the state suicide prevention coordinator. So I work within the Kentucky Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. And I was asked today to come and talk with you all about postvention, suicide postvention planning. And so a little bit different than prevention, although we know postvention is good prevention. So also just know that there's been a lot happening in our state, in some specific regions. Just this last couple weeks, we've had two youth deaths kind of reach national news and kind of thinking through what do you all need as Frisk, as folks who are in supporting both your youth, but also your families. And, I know you support just darn near anybody. And so what questions do you have for me? What needs do you have from our office, or how can we support you? Betty just went to, and it's why we saw each other yesterday. We just went through a Connect postvention training. So it's an 8 hour, 7.5, 8 hour day-long training, which I'm going to give you guys like the primer of today. And so our hope is to eventually get this so folks can come as part of some of your more systematic events like the Victory Over Violence conference or some of these places where you already are. We're hoping to get the longer postvention offered to those who might want to take it. But first I wanted to say this is your hour. So if you have a need or if you have a question in any of it, please come off mute. Please put it in the chat and if I could have someone monitor the chat. I have it up, but sometimes as I'm talking, please feel free to come off mute and say, "Hey, there's a question in the." Um, oh, yay! You have a GLS grant. Yay! Um, yeah, I'm here for you. But I'm gonna go over just what is postvention, and then also kind of talk through like what are some things that have been helpful, and really the idea is we don't do postvention just after death. We pre-plan our postvention response when we're in our full brains, our full bodies, and we are not in crisis mode. So I have some resources to give you all to start thinking about what is your plan if the unfortunate event of a suicide death or traumatic event. So we're saying suicide postvention, but this postvention is about, yeah, any kind of traumatic bereavement, overdose, um, you know, but particularly we're talking about suicide, but the framework itself can be used for any kind of unexpected sudden death like suicide or overdose. Um, so I'm going to start, but again, feel free to jump in and kind of just whatever it is you need, you just let me know. So we have just recently started using, I'm getting my PowerPoint ready, so that's why I don't multitasking has never been my strong suit, but multitasking under the week I've had is really just it's not happening. So I appreciate your grace and your patience. All right, here we go. Okay, can y'all see that? I'm gonna make it into slide view. No whammies. Y'all remember that show? Some of you might be too young.
We can see it back. Thank you.
All right, is it okay? Is that better? All right, there you go. So postvention training for professionals. Again, this is kind of just the primer, and I added some other stuff just for kind of resources. But the idea is, prevent postvention is a planned response for after a suicide that really shifts the focus from those upstream policy kind of type changes, although those are important. It shifts the focus to what do we do right now in these next 48 hours, in these next 2 weeks, in these next months, kind of all the way up to a year, and then kind of more longer term support. What we know about suicide deaths is it's a process, it's a journey. Families, individuals are on a different process and a different journey. But for any of us who know someone, especially a young person who's died by suicide, it becomes a part of our experience. It becomes a part of kind of just those events in our lives that we remember. So, but yeah, the idea is that it's a planned response for after a suicide that promotes and really centers that healing and that those grief supports, and the way we talk about suicide in those immediate, or the way we don't even talk about suicide. So all of that to say, the idea is to reduce future suicide incidents, because we know after a death, especially our young people, young people in the sphere of those that might have died are going to be more at risk, because they're going to be dealing with a lot more kind of big life events. So um, one of our goals, our first goal, is to provide a response, a planned response for that traumatic event. Who's there, who can kind of hold space, who's there to kind of, what's the process for telling staff, what's the process for telling youth that someone died? Are the parents okay to say it's a suicide? Are they not? Who's the primary contact with the family? Is it your superintendent? Is it, who is that? And then our other goal is to reduce risk post-event. So if you have a whole school in your all's case, and in some cases it's bigger than a school, but let's just say a whole school or a whole district, what are we doing to increase the signs of more clinical level grief or post-traumatic stress in folks that we might be seeing? What's our plan for, okay, I'm seeing this on social media, and it's worrisome because it's not really like that young person to say that. Who do I contact? So what we talk about a lot is, see something, say something, but we have to, the who to say something to has to be really clear and explicit. And then the third part is always just promoting that healing. And for me, healing is about voice and choice. As many people are as on this chat, there's 28 people boxes. I see other folks in rooms. There would be 28 different ways to grieve. And so how after a suicide do we normalize grief responses to not be one way or other, or to last one certain amount of time versus, or they look like they're doing fine. What does that mean? So those are kind of some of the things to kind of think through as we're going through. Oh gosh. This a postvention response, and for any of you who are MTSS trained, these are not going to be new. I said it right, Betty. I'm so proud of myself. I butchered the acronym yesterday, and I most of the time do. But so these are your tier ones, your tier twos, your tier threes. So when you're thinking about your postvention responses and you're planning for it, okay, so you have a youth that's died. So that indicated is that small group, that their class, right? If they're a ninth grader, it's the classes. It's also siblings, girlfriends, boyfriends, sports teams, after school activities. Those would be kind of your, what you would classify as your indicated group. And then you get towards your selective, right? So maybe it's the whole grade of ninth grade, or and we talk a lot about postvention as it relates to students. But one of the things I think Frisk are really positioned well to think about is staff, right? In every suicide situation where I've been called to a school to kind of either support or just provide like an ear, everyone is rightfully focused on young people. But what we know too is suicide exposure affects us as adults as well. And how well we are taken care of as staff is how well we can take care of our young people. So for those of us who maybe not have that direct line to students, which you guys do as well, but how can we pour into the staff? How can we create space for administrators, teachers, counselors? Because from my experience, those are the ones that are kind of carrying the crisis response. But how can we give them their casseroles too? Kind of to use like, if someone dies, I feel like casseroles are just provided freely. So your indicated is that kind of core team. What's your selective response? And then what's your more universal? How are you working with media? Who's your media contact? And this says after a high profile death. And you know, I think as we see in Kentucky right now, with the amount of media around youth suicide across the state, particularly in one region, but across the state, I think any future deaths are going to maybe be more higher profile than they would have in typical times. And so, I wouldn't necessarily think that every suicide death is going to reach the level of media coverage, but because of the climate that we're in currently, it could. So just kind of being mindful of the full climate of the Commonwealth right now as it relates to youth suicide. Another way to look at this, and so this is Dr. Julie Searle's work, and it's another way, and I think more kind of a succinct way to look at that same continuum is this continuum of survivorship, and I apologize for the graphic on the bottom. So you can kind of see in that middle, or that the core team is like, these are your long-term bereaved folks. They woke up one day, they had that person died by suicide, and the next, from that moment on, their life is not going to be the same. It's going to be a lifelong journey of metabolizing, of coming to terms with that, learning to maybe potentially get to some post-traumatic growth. But these folks are on a journey because of a death. We get into that second circle, that short-term bereaved. These are folks where you can kind of think about like, yeah, you're going to be wildly upset about it. You're going to lose sleep. You're going to have maybe some of these. But in time, you won't maybe get back to your baseline, but you'll get back to some degree of kind of operating as you maybe would before the death. When you get into suicide affected and suicide exposed, these are folks that you're going to hear about it. You might have a couple intrusive thoughts for a day or two, a week, maybe 2 weeks, and it's gonna, it's obviously going to impact you because you're hearing about it, or you're seeing, or you're witnessing things. But you're going to get back to kind of a baseline or within your window of tolerance, to some extent pretty quickly. And then the other folks are these suicide exposed. And to be honest, we've all been suicide exposed, right? We've all heard of Robin Williams' death. We've all heard of, kind of, especially now, if you've followed the news, we're hearing about this. So just hearing about a suicide, just knowing about a suicide, kind of puts us in that suicide exposed area. Now, one thing that we're learning about and kind of research is telling us is when we think about contagion or a cluster, um, a lot of times folks really, really worry about this inner kind of long-term bereaved. But what we're really finding is those folks get quite a bit of services right away. They get kind of continual, ongoing support. And, they're really wrapped around, I feel like. Because of the incredible work and heart that you and schools all bring. One of the things that we're recognizing, and some research indicates, is those folks that maybe are more at risk for suicide kind of after another suicide is this like second short-term or suicide affected rings. And what I will say about this too is these are all kind of self-prescribed, like I'm gonna tell myself where I am based upon, and again, I keep saying Betty, so I'm going to use her. So Betty, it's not like, well, Beck is in long-term bereaved. It's like, well, no, we could have ideas or hypothesis about where someone might lay, but really it's kind of up to us. And I'm going to tell a story, and it's going to involve suicide death. And so I just want to give a warning about that. It's not graphic or anything like that, but I just want to just give folks a heads up. So I work with a woman who lost her son um, to suicide, and one of the last things that he did was then Twitter. He put hashtag a person's name or hashtag RIP and then a person's name. And that person's name, after this person saw it, after the person I've been working with, after she saw it, she researched and she looked it up and she realized that it was another youth who had died by suicide, but she wouldn't have considered this this person that he said RIP about. She didn't know him. He'd never been over to her house. She wouldn't have classified him as like a close friend to her son. Um, but obviously, there was something about that death that really stuck with or resonated with her son who died because that was the last thing he wrote. And so when one of the goals, right, was to reduce risk, um, these are when you kind of are aware of just people who are orbiting, talking more about death, talking more about suicide. Maybe they're posting on somebody's tribute page in a way that is kind of outside of what you know their relationship to be, and or it's more consistent. Like, tribute pages after first couple of months tend to get pretty quiet. But maybe these folks are 6 months, they're still saying, hey, thinking about you, or at a young person I worked with, and she passed, but she didn't pass from suicide. But so this is just an example. Um, I would go to her page quite regularly just to, kind of check in. But I recognized pretty early on that one person in particular, one youth, was posting more on her page as to what I knew kind of their relationship to be. And then, a year out, she's still posting, and in 18 months, she's still posting. And so I just became aware that this person is kind of orbiting, or not really fascinated, but just in connection with this death in some specific way that maybe I wasn't aware of. So when you think about responding to suicide, or being planful about how to respond to a future suicide, think about what is your pathway for communication if someone does recognize, like, hey, this kid is really like writing more about death, or this kid is really not showering and being sent into my office to get clothes or hygiene, like, and they're usually pretty good about it. Like, some of these behaviors that I would say kind of come out sideways, um, could, and a lot of times after a suicide death are related to that. They might not have the words for it, but so yeah, just some kind of real life examples of how maybe Trey was his name. Maybe Trey was in that short-term bereaved or long-term bereaved, and he just didn't, his mom or school wasn't aware of it because they didn't see them as a close friend, or something resonated. Um, so hopefully this is helpful. This is also something to do kind of as a crisis team, as you're, if there is a death, and to put on your pre-plan. Like, we're going to do a relationship map of the person who died, and we're going to go from their class. Um, I want to just also give a great example that happened, as far as a response that I thought was just really brilliant. And not everybody's going to have access to this, so I kind of even am hesitant to share. But in one school, they had a therapy dog, and the person that kind of was with the therapy dog followed the young person who died by suicide's class. So class schedule. So for a day or two, that therapist and that therapy dog just followed that person's class. And so as they were hearing about it, as they were processing it, there was just one additional support of a sweet, cuddly therapy dog, which again, not all of us have access to, but it was a great example of a community relationship that kind of just happened as a response to a tragedy. So. Uh, yeah, just wonderful example I wanted to highlight as an option. Um, I put this on here to just say, we're talking a lot about recognizing and thinking about people who might be at risk because of another person's suicide. Um, but many of you maybe have heard me talk or whatever, but I am also someone with lived experience. And when I was at the height of my kind of suicidal crisis, I was in mental health care. I was working alongside therapists. I was working alongside OTs, like taking care of young people, and I considered myself a helper, right? Like I was the one that was supposed to have the answers and be okay. So I just put this in here um, just as a note that sometimes the people who help need help too. And suicide and suicide postvention, the number one overall tenet is no one does it alone. It's not one person's job. It's not one person's responsibility. It's not even the school's sole responsibility. It is everyone in that community, including myself, because I'm the suicide prevention coordinator. Like it's all of our responsibilities, because the weight of a youth death by suicide is too much to bear for one person, for one entity, for one family. So that the idea is we all got each other. And if you're part of a response and you feel like, hey, I haven't slept for a while, I just need to talk, like let holler at me. We'll talk. Holler at someone, we'll talk. Because we can't do this alone and we shouldn't do this alone. And that's a big tenet of grief, especially traumatic grief. It will tell you you are uniquely alone. It will tell your school you're uniquely alone in this. And so anything that we can plan before an event to help coordinate casseroles. I talk a lot about food, so sorry about that. But anything that we can do before so that when we're in that crisis, all we have to do is just be with our youth, be with each other. We're not having to coordinate, well, who's going to cover this shift or who's going to do this. So the idea with postvention pre-planning is do as much as possible because what many folks and long-term survivors will tell you, it's not what happened, it's how it happened that was most supportive. It's that people kept looking at them in the eyes. It's that people kept showing up and kept, doing the things and being in relationship that was really the most helpful. So your agent of change in postvention is the relationship. And anything that you can do to center people being in relationship with each other, especially our youth, and take away all the other noise, so to speak. That's the whole goal of post-pension pre-planning, is to kind of figure out who can come, who can, what can they offer before it's needed. And so this is a little bit of a guidance and pre-plan as much as possible. There's going to be a direct response. There's going to be, this is what we're going to do. And then, thinking about, and I have this as a cluster because it's something that we're working on, but, future deaths, future support. And I will say, we're working with that right now, but it's not typical. This is not going to happen after every death. And so to not plan and be fearful in those moments, because it is an unusual experience. And so we don't want to operate out of fear that it might happen. We want to, know that our pre-planned response is going to provide the care that we need. Um, so, some core principles of postvention is, recognizing it's a public health crisis, you know, helping survivors. And again, your school is going to be full now of survivors and that they're going to vary in their relationship. But how do we center understanding, education, normalizing grief responses? As a society, even with adults, we don't talk a lot about grief. We don't normalize a lot of grief responses. And so those are people that I would really highly prioritize. Are your hospice folks, your grief counselors, and these are folks that have a very specific skill set. Grief and grief support is not long-term clinical care. It is kind of more crisis centered a lot of times. What are your immediate needs? What are these kind of things that are helpful? So grief group and grief support can happen for a long time, but it is oftentimes different than your clinical care, where you're getting into, kind of some of the origins and all of that. Now, that's not to say that grief can't turn into a need for more ongoing clinical care, but a lot of times they are separate. So when you're doing your pre-plan, really look for folks who are experts in grief, like your hospice. Like, I want to give a shout out to Kentucky Center for Grieving Children and Families. Layla, her team, Emily's the director, mental health director. They offer free grief support for teens online. You can Google their page, Kentucky Center for Grieving Families and Children. All of that is free. We're working with them right now to respond to a school as a as needed basis. So if an adult wants to talk to a grief counselor, we have them kind of on retainer. It's voice and choice. They're not coming and teachers aren't being told you have to talk to this person. They're there on retainer and available kind of at the discretion of the adults. So they offer both youth centric and really youth led grief support online that's free. And then, we're working with them to provide support for adults. Um, and I've mentioned this before, but suicide is extends beyond the youth. It's really something to kind of think about as a full life span. There are also cultural factors that need to be, considered. Is this something the family, talks about because of religious beliefs or practices? Or they don't because of religious practices or beliefs? Um, you know, uh, yeah, all of those factors. Is it rural? Is it urban? Was it a male or a female that died? So when we're responding, we have to think about all of those. I will tell you that most males that I've worked with, most boys, young males that I've worked with, they're not going to sit down and do a lot of, face-to-face clinical kind of therapeutic stuff. But if you can get them doing something, we had a great example yesterday of the therapist went and took them to the golf range and they did therapy on the golf range. And when that kid was hitting golf balls, they were talking. So, kind of thinking about those different types of cultural factors. And not everybody's going to need the same thing, nor should it be appropriate that everyone gets the same thing. So kind of working with folks as they're at, where they're at. And really one of the things that, to think about is education and linkage between, what's the baseline of what people know about suicide and how are we linking to support, to care, and how are we really building the system to wrap around folks, as they're grieving. Um, and all of this stuff. I'm going to actually stop here and check in with folks. One of the things that we think about and talk about with suicide postvention is the way we talk about suicide in the aftermath of a suicide will do two things for youth. It will either tell them this is an adult that is competent and confident in talking about this, and if I ever experience this, I can go to them, or it will tell them these adults aren't comfortable talking about it and I'm not and therefore like I don't feel comfortable to go talk about this if they ever. And so, there's going to be a lot of concern for schools and for the peers that are there. And this is not language that we as adults have, and so it's not realistic for us to think about working with the suicide death as language that youth have. So really we, in our postvention responses, we're giving kids the language to talk about death, to talk about traumatic death, and how we do that in a way that's not shaming. How do we do the way that doesn't further stigmatize suicide death? Is really really important because now we know, right, through lots of stuff, that now we have folks more at risk. And so is the way we're talking about it, is it going to invite that person for future conversations or is it going to discourage future conversations with youth? Um, And so any message that you put out, any media that you put out, or any kind of something that you do as a response, really ask yourself. And if you have peers or young people in your corner, say, hey, how does this feel to hear? Does it feel like it's judgment, or does it feel like it's shaming or stigmatizing? Because that's not the message. And so the difference is, like, we want to normalize support. We don't want to normalize suicide, right? We want to make sure that, it doesn't become just a thing that youth can do, but we do want to normalize our adult responses to it, that we are confident, that we are competent, that we, center the worry and the concern of young people, and we listen. And that's really easily said on a lunch and learn. It is not easily done when you yourself have experienced it or in the midst of that as well. So I want to stop and just give folks a second to think about all that, digest that, and then see what your responses are, what your thoughts are, if you have any additional questions. So I guess my question to you all is, as you as you are in your roles, when you think about crisis as a whole and your crisis response, like, how are Frisk in that? And does their crisis response specifically include suicide as well? I guess that's a question I have for you all to think about for yourselves.
I'll speak just from when I was a coordinator. I know if anything happened and there was something that would alter the school climate for a while, it was just always known as a first coordinator, really any adult in the building, to just kind of be alert, be aware, and be available um, for all the kids around, after something like that. Just if they need an outlet, someone to come to, just to always be aware and ready for that.
I love that. I love that language. Be alert and ready, prepared. And, have small things that the kids can do. Because even if I've been to some Frisk office, so even if it's like folding jeans or, organizing socks or, whatever it might be, it's helpful to keep something to keep their hands busy, because their brain and minds are going to be super busy, and sometimes folks can settle that by just talking, and some folks will also need some outlets. But I love that response and that just awareness. So thank you.
And I'll say, Beck, I'll kind of piggyback off of Beth, being a former coordinator myself, as I'm sure anybody in this webinar can speak. Anytime there's any kind of tragic events, whatever it may, normally for the Frisk are the first people that people kind of looking at to just even for guidance and things. So to be available is obviously is an important part of it, because I was fortunate to not, during my time, not to deal with any suicides within school, but we dealt with some, tragic other events. And a lot of times in those situations, just like with suicide, you're typically one of the first individuals that they kind of look at, reach out to kind of get some guidance on things. So it's so important to have those resources to talk about the prevention. But something that was always difficult, and I know, is the postvention. Man, like, after the fact, how do you handle things? Because there's obviously long-term effects that go on, some things you can do. So having that information, I think, is just great. So I want to kind of throw that in there. And then also, we do have a question, or had a comment in the chat that said, could you speak again briefly about identifying adults that are comfortable speaking about suicide? And are you referring to adults available in the school setting?
I was pulling up some stuff. So I'm going to drop in a Google Drive for you all. This is kind of all of the things I've pulled together as far as what might be helpful for postvention planning and response for schools specifically. And there are things in there that can really help about like adults. And I think you have to think about like to your question about being comfortable speaking about suicide. So um it's an uncomfortable topic, right? People are worried about if I say the wrong thing, if I, am I going to put the idea in their head, if I talk about it openly and honestly. Like there are still very kind of solidly ground things that, we carry from what we were told as young people or but the idea is like, yeah, so if a student is talking about it or even hinting around it, we're asking clearly and directly, hey, are you thinking about are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And notice I didn't say harming yourself because those are two different experiences. And so, and then just kind of thinking about um, how do I convey, and mostly it's just through listening, right? It's not even talking about suicide, but how do I convey support and understanding and empathy for all of the complex emotions that might come after a death, or even, if someone's having thoughts themselves, which obviously elicits a whole nother response of like doing a screening and referral and making sure the parents are aware. Um, but I think that the more we are kind of in shared spaces like this where we're saying like, let's talk about it. What's your response to it? How are you doing? Then we can, and again, it's like we never want to normalize it, but we want to be sure that we're not indirectly communicating a discomfort. Because kids are super receptive to that. And so, I think just listening, um, asking clarifying questions, normalizing, yeah, having pretty regular thoughts about it is a pretty natural response to something like this. Kind of all of that, like those good skills that we learned, hopefully that we learned and you guys use because you're in the role that you all are in. And there's also in this packet that I gave you in this Google Doc, there are there's a document in there and I can and look for it specifically, but it's from the Dougie Center, which if you do not familiar with the Dougie Center, funny name, incredible resources. So there's a document in there about how to talk about suicide with the developmentally like the developmental stages. So if I'm under 8, these are the terms and things I'm looking for. If I'm under, if I'm 9 to 13 or something like that, here's how I'm talking about it. Because I'm not going to talk to a senior about suicide the same way I'm going to talk to, middle school, elementary. And so there's some documents in there that I wanted to make sure to share that gives you some of that hints as well. There's also stuff in there to send out to parents after an event. So here's things to be looking for at home. And here's some things to be aware of. Here's how to talk about it in your own home, with your youth. And so hopefully that helps. So I think, but that comes that confidence comes from talking about suicide because you've done it. You've sat in adult circles and you try to talk about it like, hey, and I tell folks all the time, like, hey, if I say something that it doesn't sit well, if you're a loss survivor or someone with lived experience, like, let me know and I won't use that again. And so they're just ways. And one of the things I say a lot, a lot is if you can't substitute the word cancer for the way that you're talking about suicide, then you're probably talking about suicide in a kind of a biased way. So we don't commit cancer, right? We don't have successful cancer, or successful attempts at cancer, like, so we use suicide as just a description of the death. They died by suicide. They killed themselves. They took their own life. Very direct language. We don't say successful suicide attempt because that's a death, right? If someone died from an attempt, that's a death. And so we also don't say failed suicide attempt because that person is probably pretty shameful, like has a lot of shame, and a lot of stuff. And so, um, oh yeah. Uh, good question about the direction of it. And I think it's you could if you can do it in private, I think those conversations happen quite a bit easier. Also, I think preemptively and just as I try to set meetings up like this. So, you know, if it's a first meeting, I try to say, hey, let's ground ourselves in some like language, helpful language, and we go over that to begin with. Or if you're thinking about it like you can send out. There are tons and tons and tons of resources about helpful ways to talk about it or words to use. So send that out before your meeting. But yeah, I think to have that one-on-one conversation is best. But I also, was in a meeting yesterday, and someone was using some not helpful language, and we just called them in to like, hey, one of the things about suicide postvention and prevention is that we've recognized that the way we talk about suicide is really important. And, you use the word blah, and typically we're staying away from that word, and this is what we're using instead. Do you have to swallow hard and kind of not be conflict avoidant? Like, I hate conflict. But I think you kind of just do. You have to do that kind of in order to shift the narrative, um, and kind of talk through that. So hopefully, something that's helpful. But yeah, as much as possible, do it privately or preemptively by sending out like, hey, this is how we talk about it, and this is important. I don't know if any of you all get our suicide or school suicide recommendations. Um, I can put that also in there, but there is just a one pager that you can print off about how we talk about suicide. It'll tell you words to avoid. I think all of that. Um, can you recommend a place to find? Yes. So that was one. But if you go to SPRC's Suicide Prevention Resource Center, they have some really great resources. I'm trying to think of the ones that really just pop off like the sheet of um but yeah, if you Google just, best practices in talking about suicide, there'll be lots and lots of material out there. Stay away from the kind of the names that you don't know. So like ANAMI, SPRC, AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'd stick with some of those kind of nationally known orgs. But like I mentioned, in our 2023, no, 2024, 2025 school training recommendation, and I can find that link and put it in the chat too. There's a full page that you can just print off. And it's in color. It's not, it's aesthetically kind of pleasing. But yeah, so send those out before you're meeting about a suicide or suicide prevention planning, or also just as information. Um, the other cool things that a lot of schools don't know about is you all are now required to do your 1 hour of high quality evidence-based training. um, that doesn't just have to be prevention. So if you're looking at your schools and you've had a death, um, or you just want to learn more about postvention, you can ask us to do a postvention training on safe messaging, on media guidelines, on any of these kind of things. And they're all evidence informed, evidence based, and they would count towards your hour. And so I just want to encourage folks to kind of think outside the box for your staff training, that it doesn't have to just be the thing you've always done. It can be prevention or postvention, and it can be on any of these topics, like how to talk about it, recommendations for how to talk to their students about it. Any of these kind of things that we provide are evidence-based and just considered best practice. So let me know if you need support in kind of working with your, training team on some fresh ideas or some different things to talk about for your annual training, but we'd be more than happy to help. Um, so yeah, let me look at what Carla said. Yeah. Carla, yes. This is something that I've heard quite a bit. And so just for, for purposes of you all, like we've had young folks as young as 8 or 9 die by suicide in our state, not just nationally, but in our state. Research shows that kids as young as 8 know the word suicide, and they might not have a full grasp of the finality of death. And so, um, but yeah, and even if they don't want to talk about it as suicide ideation, or if they're too young, I think that for reframing for them, like any support we can give them now is just going to prevent future risk for suicide. If they're too young, and you don't think this is going to happen now, anything we can do to provide support and resources to them is only going to prevent future deaths once they get older, or future risk once they get older. And I know that's a pretty simplistic kind of way to talk about it, but also I think, and one of the things I'm working on is radical acceptance of what I have control of, right? And I can only offer and suggest things. But if you are suggesting this and parents are dismissing you, or parents aren't taking you seriously, or not taking the school seriously, there is not a lot, unless it is clear and warrant like a CPS investigation. I mean, there have been situations where I've known schools to have such a clear risk that to have such a clear idea that the young person was at risk, that and the student and the parents were given multiple kind of suggestions and they weren't doing anything. So that's like an extreme situation. I would say I wouldn't think that would be kind of common practice, but um, how do you support each other when and I think if you back it up, right, that's like kind of a moral injury of when you're giving parents what you are worried about and what you're seeing as concern, and they're not doing anything. It's like, how do we support each other in holding that fear, and holding that disappointment maybe in the parents, or anger at the parents, but um, how do we support each other in that? Because it is really hard to hold that. And so if you're a regional coordinator or something like that, like checking in with your folks and just giving them the opportunity to just talk about it, like their concerns, their just worry, and it could get to the point where it becomes like pretty distressing for them, and they might need to talk to someone, because if we show up with our full hearts like we do to do this work, you know and someone's not taking this advice, it's hard, it's really hard. So Carla, I hope you hear that. I hope that you hear that you did all you've done. If you document it, if you continue to find avenues. The other thing is, we're trying to expand outside of your school building for support. So if it becomes such a situation where you have lots of parents being like, mental health isn't a thing, suicide isn't a thing, who are their trusted messengers, and how do we get to them? So, and this is outside of your school building, and that's where your prevention folks come in. That's where I can come in. Like, if their trusted people are faith leaders, let's talk to faith leaders. If their trusted people are whoever, the Mexican restaurant down the street, because who doesn't love a little Mexican restaurant, like a little Mexican food ever? Like, if that's where they go, if that's where they're talking, like, let's talk about it. Let's get them involved, not in a direct way to say, hey, faith leader, go talk to so and so, but like if we educate them on suicide care, then they're going to be more likely to, talk about it in a way that seeks help and promotes help seeking or supports that parent. Um, so yeah, I hope that helps. Other questions, thoughts, comments? These are great, and I really appreciate the dialogue.
Like, I would just like to give all the coordinators on the call a shout out for the work that they do around any social emotional learning, or any small groups, or any relationship building that they're doing with their parents, their students, bringing those community partners in, whether it's faith-based and or bringing in other people to do those services. Having kids identify their emotions at an early and young age is helpful for when they struggle with mental health issues if they do later in life. So I just wanted to say that and how much I appreciate the coordinators.
Yeah, and I appreciate you elevating that because like what you do as Frisk is suicide prevention. So the very simple services, and I'm not even say simple, like the very comprehensive, robust services, if it's providing a shower or providing clean clothes or providing that backpack, like anything that is signaling kids out as others or as isolated or uniquely experienced, like what you do is suicide prevention. And so know that, know deep in your bones that what you're doing and the services that you're providing to both the youth and the kids, it's taking care of them in ways that they need support, that could be othering, that could be, you know, increase because the basis of there's a interpersonal theory of suicide that talks about when folks feel isolated and when folks feel like a burden, those two combination of those two experiences, coupled with the capacity to override their biology, so the all of the work that you do to increase inclusion, to create safe spaces, all of that is prevention. And I just wish we could go around saying that, right? It's not a program. It's not a 1 hour training once a month, like, or once a year. It is really the services that you all do. And so applaud yourself, give yourself kudos, hear me saying thank you. Because that's it. That's it. And just that support that you mentioned, I don't know who came off the very first and said that, but yeah, just providing a space is huge. It's huge. And that doesn't necessarily satisfy our itch of what to do after a suicide because we don't want to live with that in our body. So we want to do all the things and plan all the things, but creating that safe corner of a class or of a school where someone can just sit and be, that's golden, is golden. So it doesn't have to be super robust or complex. It can just literally be as simple as sharing a candy bar with a kid. Yeah. Coaches. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Um, yeah, I love that idea of how to talk to coaches. I work with a guy who's a sports psychologist. Um, and there's so much emotional, social learning that happens within teams and coaches. So, yeah, how do we prep our coaches, especially our male coaches, on what to do when they recognize someone is a little more hot-headed or a little less focused, like what kind of skills are we giving them to recognize when that could be something that they need to talk to someone else about versus kind of just deal with it on the field or deal with it on the court. But yeah, I love that suggestion. And there actually are suicide like kind of prevention folks focus stuff for coaches. And so I can try to find that and send it to you all as well. One of the other things, just I gotta mention it, but um, making sure that y'all are monitoring your web usage, your social message, your social media usage of kids. I don't know. I'm working a little bit with the Office of Homeland Security and uh, other folks about how to address kind of some of the very predatory online behavior that we're seeing from folks without there's a line of like we need parents to know but we don't need kids to know. And so there are groups out there like TCC and 764 that are really perpetrating on young people online. And so working with your sheriff, working with your all law enforcement, because they kind of know how to talk about that in a way that like honors just the not sharing out of tons of information. So this awareness about online predators, like it needs to be strategic, but also we now know very, very clearly that it is leading to youth suicide. So just being aware and teaching parents to, there's an app called oh Bark, BARK. and it allows for mirroring of social media, like of phone usage. So a parent or caregiver would have a mirror image of kind of what's going on their young person's devices. Now I'll say like folks are tricky. So you know, they're going to, Discord channels, to this, to that. So yeah, I would really work with your SROs, and make sure, one of the things that we're really promoting right now is the use of the stop tip line. Um, and the stop tip line folks and your SROs, they'll have videos for your kids to send out about the usage of stop tip line. Like if you recognize your buddy is being kind of radicalized or doing some stuff that you're worried about, like we need to know about it. And this is what the stop tip line does. So that's something that's not necessarily post-venture related, but like if I'm talking to people in front of students, I'm talking about that right now. So okay, we're hosting the dangers of, yep, love it, love it. Thank you, Terry. Yeah. And shout out to April, Miss April, and you all. Yeah, I'm with y'all. Any other thoughts? I'm recognized we're at 1:30, right? This is okay. All right. So yeah, I will wrap up. I'll put my email in the chat. Hopefully I'll have it, but if you have anything that you need, I'm on a team now of there's like 4 of us. So if I can't help you, I will get you to someone who can help you, or it will have a, team response. So thank you all so much. And I just really appreciate what you do for our kids and their families and for the school as a whole.